legions of people take the words of Nostradamus seriously. Perhaps he merely recognized an unfortunate but universal truth that history does repeat itself.
The same as Donald Trump in 2016 when I predicted Donald Trump's win on my totally nonpartisan system.
This was not the end. It was only the beginning of our fight to rescue the American dream.
From the bloody chaos of the French Revolution to the fiery destruction of London and the shattering blasts of the atomic bombs that ended World War II, Nostradamus accurately predicted the future centuries in advance. Now, as the presidential election draws near, another prediction about the election and the fate of Donald Trump has vigorously shaken the former president's camp. What is the prediction for the coming election?
Alan Lichtman has accurately predicted the winner of the presidential election for the past 40 years.
How accurate is this prediction? Join us on a thrilling journey as we uncover the shocking Nostradamus prophecy that has left everyone on edge. Nostradamus, the master prognosticator. Nostradamus, also known as Michel de Nostradame, was France's most famous astrologer and visionary in the 16th century. His most famous work, Les Prophecies, is a collection of mysterious quatrains published in 1555, containing many predictions. Despite their puzzling nature, many scholars believe Nostradamus was a skilled fortune teller. In Les Prophecies, Nostradamus wrote 942 four-line verses in various languages, including French, Greek, Latin, and Occitan. He intentionally used vague language and imagery to make his work hard to understand, ensuring it would remain mysterious and debated for generations. This ambiguity has led to many different interpretations over the centuries. Nostradamus is well known for predicting major historical events. One famous example is the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center in New York City on September 11, 2001. While he didn't mention the event directly, some analysts believe his quatrains describe it accurately. He is also credited with predicting the Great Fire of London in 1666, where a quatrain is thought to refer to the devastating fire that destroyed much of the city. Additionally, Nostradamus is known for his supposed connections to the British royal family. One notable prediction is about Queen Elizabeth I, where some interpretations suggest he accurately foretold the length of her life and the year of her death. This accuracy has impressed many people, strengthening their belief in his prophetic abilities. Like this seer seamlessly prophesied, an American expert, Professor Alan Lichtman, has just revealed a shocking revelation in a recent interview.
King Henry II, in which I clearly said that my writings will carry more weight in the future than during my lifetime.
The Chris Cuomo Project. In an interview with Chris Cuomo on the Chris Cuomo Project, Professor Alan Lichtman disclosed the outcome of the 2024 presidential election. The professor stated that he could predict the next president thanks to a special method called the 13 keys. According to him, these keys came about naturally, not by design.
I met Volodya Kailas-Borak. Volodya turned to me and said, "We are going to collaborate."
Lichtman explained that he developed the keys in 1981 through an unusual collaboration with Valery Kailas-Borak, the world's leading authority in earthquake prediction. They met at Caltech, and Kailas-Borak suggested using earthquake prediction methods to forecast election outcomes. Initially, Lichtman was skeptical because earthquakes were not a concern in Washington, D.C., where he taught at American University. However, Kailas-Borak convinced him by explaining his past success in predicting earthquakes and his involvement in negotiating the nuclear test ban treaty in 1963. Kailas-Borak wanted to apply earthquake prediction methods to elections, which he could not do in the Soviet Union. He persuaded Lichtman by reconceptualizing presidential elections in geophysical terms. They viewed elections not as contests between candidates or ideologies, but as periods of stability or political earthquakes where the White House party might be voted out.
We recast American presidential elections.
Lichtman and Kailas-Borak examined every American presidential election from 1860, when Abraham Lincoln was elected, to the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980. They chose 1860 because it marked the beginning of Republican versus Democratic competition. Using pattern recognition methods from earthquake prediction, they identified patterns in the political environment indicating stability or political earthquakes. Lichtman believed there was a core consistency in the American electorate from 1860 to the present, despite changes like the introduction of aeroplanes, radio, and television. This belief, combined with Kalis Barak's pattern recognition methods, led to the creation of the 13 keys. These are true or false questions that predict election outcomes. The White House party is predicted to lose if 6 or more keys are false. This system more accurately predicted political stability and earthquakes than any other method. But what are these sacred questions? The 13 keys. The first key is the party's mandate. This key is true if the party in power gains seats in the U.S. House of Representatives during the last presidential and midterm elections combined. For instance, in the 1982 House elections during Ronald Reagan's first term, the Republicans lost 27 seats. However, since they had gained 35 seats in 1980, they had a net gain of 8 seats, making this key true. Lichtman explains that midterm elections show how well the party in power is performing and indicate overall voting trends in the country. If the party loses many seats, it can hurt the president's ability to pass laws, causing other keys to turn false. By the 2020 election, the party in power had won re-election 11 out of 14 times when they had a net gain of seats in the House compared to the last midterm elections. The exceptions were 1860, 1952, and 2000. The second key is the no primary contest. This key is true if the party's nominee wins at least 2/3 of the delegate vote on the first ballot at the convention, with no significant party splits. Lichtman says a unified party behind one nominee shows exemplary leadership, while a contested nomination indicates internal party problems due to weak leadership. In 1860, the Democrats split over slavery and needed 59 ballots to nominate Stephen A. Douglas. In 1896, a Democratic dispute required 5 ballots to nominate William Jennings Bryan. In 1982, the Republicans split between President William Howard Taft and former President Theodore Roosevelt. Taft got only 52% of the vote after progressives walked out. In 1968, deep divisions within the Democrats over the Vietnam War led to strong opposition to Hubert Humphrey's nomination. By the 2020 election, the party in power had won re-election 21 out of 28 times when this key was true. When this key was false, the party lost 11 out of 13 times, making it a strong predictor of election outcomes. On the other hand, a severe contest for the challenging party's nomination doesn't hurt their chances. A weak incumbent often leads to a crowded primary for the challenging party as they see a chance to win. Examples include Republican Abraham Lincoln in 1860, Democrat Woodrow Wilson in 1912, Republican Warren G. Harding in 1920, and Democrat Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1932. The third key is incumbent seeking re-election. Lichtman says that when a president runs for re-election, they have several advantages. They can set the national agenda and get much more media attention than non-incumbents. The president can also gain support during times of crisis, known as the rally round the flag effect. Lichtman also notes that presidents running for re-election rarely face the strongest opponents from the other party. Strong candidates usually wait until the president is seen as very weak. As of the 2020 election, when a president ran for re-election, and this key was true, the president won 17 out of 25 times. In open seat elections, the party in power lost 10 out of 16 times when this key was false. The exceptions were in 1868, 1876, 1880, 1908, 1928, and 1988. This incumbency key also ties in with the no primary contest key, as it usually means there won't be a severe contest for the party's nomination. By the 2020 election, when a president ran for re-election without facing a severe primary challenge, he had won 17 out of 21 times. The exceptions were in 1888, 1932, 1992, and 2020. If there is a serious primary challenge to the president, it shows significant unhappiness within their party and the broader electorate. The president was defeated in all 4 cases, where a president faced a severe primary challenge while running for re-election, as seen in 1892, 1912, 1976, and 1980. The 4th key is no third party. This key is false if there is a major candidate besides the nominees of the Democrats and Republicans. Most U.S. presidential elections since 1860 have been mainly contests between Democrats and Republicans. No third-party candidate has come close to winning. Lichtman says if a third-party candidate is very popular, it shows significant unhappiness with the party in power and counts against them. He defines third parties as perennial or insurgent. Looking back, this key was false when a third-party candidate won 5% or more of the national popular vote, or if there was a major split in the party in power. For example, in 1948, Henry A. Wallace and Strom Thurmond split from the Democrats. They ran notable campaigns, turning the key false for President Harry S. Truman, even though no third-party candidate won 5% of the popular vote. This key is false for future elections if a third-party candidate consistently polls at 10% or more, suggesting they will get 5% or more of the national vote. Third-party candidates often underperform their polling by about half, as voters focus on the major party candidates. This key is the only one that involves polling data. As of the 2020 election, the party in power lost 6 out of 9 times when there was a significant third-party candidate. The exceptions were in 1924, 1948, and 1996. The 5th key is about the short-term economy. This key is false if the economy is, or seems to be, in a recession during the election campaign. For example, in the early 1990s, the economy had technically recovered from a recession by March 1991. However, a poll in September 1992 showed that many people still thought the economy was in trouble, making this key false for George H.W. Bush. By the 2020 election, the incumbent party won re-election 22 out of 31 times when key 5 was true. The exceptions were in 1860, 1888, 1892, 1912, 1952, 1968, 1976, 2000, and 2016. When key 5 was false, the incumbent party lost 9 out of 10 times, the only exception being 1876. The 6th key is about the long-term economy. This key is true if the real per capita economic growth during the president's term is as good as or better than the average growth during the previous 2 terms. Lichtman says that slow economic growth shows weak leadership. By the 2020 election, the incumbent party won re-election 14 out of 22 times when key 6 was true. The exceptions were 1860, 1888, 1892, 1912, 1969, 1980, 2000, and 2016. When both economic keys were true, the incumbent party won re-election 14 out of 21 times. The exceptions were in 1816, 1888, 1892, 1912, 1968, 2000, and 2016. When key 5 was false, the incumbent party lost 9 out of 10 times, the only exception being 1876. The 6th key is about the long-term economy. This key is true if the real per capita economic growth during the president's term is as good as or better than the average growth during the previous 2 terms. Lichtman says that slow economic growth shows weak leadership. By the 2020 election, the incumbent party won re-election 14 out of 22 times when key 6 was true. The exceptions were 1860, 1888, 1892, 1912, 1969, 1980, 2000, and 2016. When both economic keys were true, the incumbent party won re-election 14 out of 21 times. The exceptions were in 1816, 1888, 1892, 1912, 1968, 2000, and 2016. When both keys were false, the incumbent party lost 8 out of 9 times, except in 1876. The 7th key is about major policy changes. This key is true if the current administration makes a significant change in government that affects the country's commerce, welfare, or future outlook. It doesn't matter if the change is widespread or what the political ideology is. Examples include Abraham Lincoln's ending slavery, Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, and Obama's Affordable Care Act. By the 2020 election, the incumbent party won re-election 15 out of 19 times when Key 7 was true. The exceptions were in 1892, 1920, 1968, and 2020. When Key 7 was false, the incumbent party lost 14 out of 22 times, with exceptions in 1872, 1876, 1923, 1956, 1972, 1998, 1996, and 2004. This key often links to other keys. For example, Herbert Hoover's failure to act strongly during the Great Depression extended the Depression, leading to social unrest, a significant loss of House seats for Hoover's party, and the rise of Franklin D. Roosevelt as a challenger. The eighth key is about social unrest. This key is false if widespread violent unrest continues or leaves essential issues unresolved by the time of the election. Such unrest makes voters question the country's stability. Examples that turned the key false include the American Civil War, the racial and anti-Vietnam War protests of 1968, and the 2020 protests sparked by the murder of George Floyd. These events were serious and widespread. On the other hand, the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, the 1980 Miami race riots, and the 1992 Los Angeles riots were too limited in scope to turn the key false. By the 2020 election, the incumbent party had lost 8 out of 11 times when significant social unrest occurred during the president's term. The exceptions were in 1864, 1868, and 1872. The ninth key is about scandals. This key is false if there is clear and widely recognized wrongdoing directly linked to the president, such as major corruption in the cabinet or presidential misconduct leading to bipartisan impeachment. Allegations of misconduct that seem politically motivated or are not directly tied to the president are often ignored by voters. For instance, the impeachment of Andrew Johnson in 1968 and the Iran-Contra affair during Ronald Reagan's second term did not turn the key false. Even though the Watergate scandal started during President Richard Nixon's first term, it did not hurt his re-election chances in 1972 because voters thought it was just political maneuvering by the Democrats. However, after Nixon was re-elected, more evidence linked him to the scandal, which led to his resignation and the Republicans' loss in 1976. As of the 2020 election, the incumbent party lost 4 out of 6 times when there was a major scandal involving the administration. The exceptions were in 1876 and 1924. The 10th key is about foreign or military failures. This key is false if a significant failure in foreign or military affairs harms the United States' reputation or shakes trust in the president's leadership. Examples of failures that turned this key false include the attack on Pearl Harbor, the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, North Vietnam's victory in the Vietnam War, and the Iranian hostage crisis. In contrast, failed diplomatic efforts, like Dwight D. Eisenhower's unsuccessful attempt to negotiate a nuclear test ban treaty, do not turn this key false. By the 2020 election, the incumbent party had lost 7 out of 11 times when there was a significant foreign or military failure. The exceptions were in 1944, 1948, 1964, and 2004. The 11th key is about major foreign or military successes. This key is true if the president achieves something that boosts the United States' reputation and interests. Examples of successes that turned this key true include forming NATO under Harry S. Truman, Dwight D. Eisenhower negotiating an armistice in the Korean War, John F. Kennedy's handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the killing of Osama bin Laden under Barack Obama. As of the 2020 election, the incumbent party won re-election 17 out of 21 times when there was a major foreign or military success. The exceptions were in 1920, 1952, 1980, and 1992. Conversely, the incumbent party lost 14 out of 20 times when there was a major failure in foreign or military affairs, with exceptions in 1876, 1880, 1936, 1940, 1984, and 1996. The incumbent party won re-election 13 out of 14 times when both key 10 and key 11 were true, except in 1992. When both keys were false, the incumbent party lost all 4 times, in 1960, 1968, 1976, and 2008. The 12th and 13th keys are about candidate charisma. The 12th key is true if the incumbent party's candidate is very charismatic or seen as a national hero, while the 13th key is false if the challenger's candidate is charismatic or a national hero. But the 13th key only applies to the challenger's party. Lichtman describes a charismatic candidate with a strong and appealing personality that attracts many voters, even those outside their party's base. James G. Blaine, William Jennings Bryan, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, and Obama were charismatic. On the other hand, while very appealing to a specific group, Donald Trump did not have the broad appeal seen in candidates like Ronald Reagan. Lichtman also explains that candidates can lose their charismatic status. For example, William Jennings Bryan was seen as charismatic in 1896 and 1900, but was ridiculed by 1908. Barack Obama was charismatic in 2008, but did not maintain the same connection with voters in 2012. A national hero is viewed as having played a crucial role in a major national success. Ulysses S. Grant and Dwight D. Eisenhower were seen as national heroes for their leadership in significant wars. In contrast, while John McCain was admired for his military service, he was not considered a national hero because he did not lead the country in wartime. As of the 2020 election, the incumbent party won re-election 8 out of 10 times when the incumbent candidate was charismatic, meaning the 12th key was true. The incumbent party lost 5 out of 6 times when the challenger's candidate was charismatic, meaning that the 13th key was false, except in 1900. How accurate are these keys? Chris asked the professor how accurate the keys were when used to predict elections from 1860 to 1976. Professor Allen said they were very accurate, even up to 1980 with little error. The professor was unaware of how big his keys were until the winter of 1981. The professor was shocked to see a newspaper article titled, "Odd Couple Discovers Keys to the White House." The media didn't contact them before publishing it, which was a big surprise. When asked about using the keys to bet on future elections and make money, the historian answered no. He believed he had done his job as an academic by publishing their findings in a top scientific journal, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. He thought he was finished until he saw the article, which made him realize he could use the system to make public predictions. The professor said that after 15 years, professional forecasters realized their big, fancy models didn't work to predict human systems using only objective measures. They found that the best models were like the keys, which combined clear indicators like economic growth with judgment-based ones like charisma. Suddenly, the keys to the White House became very popular in professional forecasting. The professor twice keynoted the International Forecasting Summit, presented it at the American Political Science Association as a classic forecasting model, and published it in the International Journal of Forecasting. After accurately predicting Donald Trump's 2016 win, which wasn't popular in mostly Democratic Washington, D.C., he won the Steckler Award for Courage in Forecasting. This made the keys mainstream, but it took 15 to 20 years. The keys can't change the election, but they don't work as well when picking a party nominee. Personalities and appearances can matter a lot in that context. That's why Lichtman waits until after conventions to make predictions. Even though Kamala Harris is expected to be the Democratic nominee, that's not enough for a prediction, according to the professor. The keys don't work for nominations because primaries influence each other, making them hard to predict. Sometimes the keys align before conventions, but recent tight elections make this less specific. For example, Lichtman predicted Ronald Reagan in 1982 and a Democratic win in 2008 and 2006. He said things were so bad for Bush's second term that any Democrat could win, which happened with Obama. The keys can fall into place late, especially in close races. Lichtman waits until after conventions to see if specific keys, like a strong third-party candidate or social unrest, stabilize. He believes many things would need to go wrong for Democrats to lose. Who will win the 2024 election? Polls aren't predictive, but they provide snapshots that shape campaign messages. A recent poll showed Harris gaining 4 points in Pennsylvania. Professor Allen believes Harris has eased concerns about Biden for voters who dislike Trump. Surprised by these polls, Chick asked the professor for his opinion on why the polls favor Harris, not as a key author, but as a political expert. The professor believes that the fear of Biden's health issues or his stepping down was troubling, but with Harris now leading, things look different. He also stated that the Democrats made an intelligent move by uniting behind Harris instead of causing a public fight, which helped maintain the crucial contest key. Historically, no party has won re-election with an open seat and a big internal fight. However, winning is possible without contest, like with Herbert Hoover in 1923 or George H.W. Bush in 1998. He also believes Harris might indirectly help the Democrats by reducing doubts about her health and mobility, which could lower support for RFK Jr. and reduce the chances of significant protests. As a black woman, Harris might influence voters' biases, but her effect mainly comes down to her charisma. Many thought America wasn't ready for a black president in 2008, but sticking to the keys proved valuable. Sometimes, what seems unconventional can turn out to be an advantage. Chris believes the current polls show a tight race, but notes that Democrats usually win only if they lead the popular vote significantly. Since Harris isn't leading by much, he thinks this favors Trump. He adds that being close in the popular vote often means a strong showing in the Electoral College. The professor, however, has a different view. He argues that polls have a larger margin of error than reported. Errors can occur because people might lie, not respond, or change their minds. Plus, predicting voter turnout introduces even more uncertainty. In 2016, pollsters underestimated Republican support, leading to mistakes. Now they're overestimating Republican strength and underestimating Democratic support. For instance, a recent New York special election had polls showing a tight race with a Democrat ahead by 1 point, but the Democrat won by 8 points. After checking the polls, Chris asks the expert why Harris is doing well. The expert says Harris is seen as part of the in-party, but doesn't count as an incumbent. Incumbency is an apparent binary factor, whether you are the president or not. He notes that the vice presidential pick didn't impact the results in past elections, like with H.W. Bush. Chris wonders if Harris's vice presidential choice matters more because she's a woman. The expert disagrees, saying race or gender doesn't influence his predictions. He compares it to adding sugar to tea. You can't understand it by analyzing each grain. Chris asks which factors might change the prediction between Harris and Trump. The expert explains Harris is currently down 3 keys: mandate due to House election losses in 2022, incumbency, and incumbent charisma, since she isn't as charismatic as FDR. 3 more keys would need to fall for her to lose. He's watching 4 keys closely. He believes the first 2 keys favor Democrats and is unlikely to fall. Therefore, many would need to go wrong for Democrats to lose this race. Chris is puzzled about why Bobby Kennedy takes votes from both Trump and Harris. The expert explains that Kennedy's polling numbers are too low to clearly see where his support comes from, and the error margin is enormous. Some polls show him taking votes from Trump, others from Harris. According to the professor, the important thing is that any third-party candidate generally hurts the party in power, because it shows people are unhappy with how things are being run. The only time it might not hurt is if there's a big split within the opposing party, which hasn't happened yet. Professor Allen says that if candidates want to be remembered, they should campaign on vision and substance, not just to win. He cites Barry Goldwater and George McGovern as examples of losing candidates who inspired future generations. He concludes that even though negative campaigning seems easier and more effective, it's possible to win by going big and bold. Like Nostradamus had predicted, will Professor Allen's pick of Harris pass? Well, we would have to wait for the D-Day. What were the most outrageous Nostradamus predictions? The French Revolution. Talking about the royal family losing power, the seer predicted the downfall of the French royal family. He said that, from the enslaved populace, songs, chants, and demands will rise. While princes and lords are held captive in prisons, these will later be received as divine prayers by headless idiots. We can think of the enslaved populace as the Third Estate, the common people of France, who mostly lived in terrible poverty and faced many unfair treatments. From 1789 to the late 1790s, 18th century France had a lot of social and political turmoil. During this time, French citizens rose in furious anger against a system that failed to recognize the extent of their suffering. Before the revolution began, peasants, then classified as serfs and tied to an inevitable servitude, faced high taxes and harsh duties imposed by aristocratic landlords. King Louis XIV and his spoiled queen, Madame Deficit, did try to ease the financial burden on the French people in some ways, changing specific laws to benefit the peasantry and even hosting public dinners at the Palace of Versailles. The monarchy was not blind to the people's struggles. However, they were highly short-sighted and unable to address the significant problems of their subjects. Regardless of how kind the king and queen tried to be, the bottom line was that France could neither feed itself nor pay off its looming debt. This lack of awareness led to their downfall. While the disconnect between the lavish lifestyle of palace life and the commoner's desperation is now seen as a critical reason for the French Revolution, it also led to Marie Antoinette and King Louis XIV, along with others, losing their well-groomed heads. But it wasn't the only reason. A severe bread and grain shortage erupts in the kingdom, intensified by the growing awareness and intellect among the middle class, who become increasingly frustrated with their limited resources. And then, of course, there are the Americans. King Louis XIV embraced the Enlightenment, excited by liberal change and ready to implement it. As a result, he supported the rebellion in the Americas, where the colonists were fighting their British rulers. He sent soldiers, ships, and abundant supplies to help the fight for liberation. Despite the king's good intentions, this support weakened France politically and economically, two things the French nobility were unwilling to pay for through higher taxes. In an ironic twist, King Louis helped the Americans overthrow their distant British king, accruing a massive debt. After frustrating parliamentarians seeking significant change, King Louis eventually allowed the new National Assembly to draft a constitution to help everyone in French society without overburdening any specific class. But while the king appeared to agree, he secretly armed his palace. In response, the assembly created a National Guard for self-defense. The king had united the people under the National Assembly, but he failed to get tax money from the rich, organize his parliament, and control the National Guard's power. In 1789, the French people decided they had enough of aristocratic rule. After an angry mob forcibly removed the king and queen from Versailles and placed them under close watch in the Tuileries Palace, things grew worse. A failed escape led to more scrutiny from people who believed the royal family didn't care about their well-being. When the king refused to step down, the National Assembly, now called the National Convention, declared the monarchy illegal in the newly liberated France. The king and queen lost their titles, and soon, their heads. The Third Estate revolted and stormed the Bastille, a fortress in Paris used as a prison. The fall of the Bastille symbolized the monarchy's abuse of power and marked the height of the French Revolution. The determined peasants quickly took control of Paris and enforced their demands by capturing the royals. The headless part of the prophecy refers to the guillotine. Although the French Revolution ultimately failed to achieve its goals and often turned into a chaotic bloodbath, the rebellion itself is still considered one of the most significant turning points in the formation of the modern world. Throughout history, people have struggled with issues of class and privilege. Frustrated and angry about the poor economic policies of the time, French citizens ultimately took it upon themselves to dismantle this oppressive system. They envisioned a new national landscape for themselves, where century-old institutions like the feudal system and absolute monarchy could be replaced with more fair and sustainable ones. Death of Henry II. Nostradamus's prophecies had a significant connection to the royal families of his time. In his book of prophecies, he decided that a young lion would defeat an old lion in a single combat battle on a warfield. This prediction, which seemed to come true, greatly enhanced his reputation. In the summer of 1559, the King of France held grand weddings for his daughter and sister, featuring a large tournament to celebrate. King Henry II, wanting to show off his skills as a warrior, challenged the renowned Count of Montgomery to single combat. During their joust with blunted lances, Montgomery's lance broke, and the sharp point went through the eye slit of Henry II's helmet, piercing his eye. After 10 days of excruciating pain, Henry died. Everyone, including Montgomery, unfortunate enough to have killed the king, credited Nostradamus with predicting the event, despite the ambiguous prophecy. He will put out his eyes in a cage of gold, 2 fleets won, then he dies a cruel death. The prophecy contained exciting details. The young lion and old lion had lion-emblazoned shields. Count Montgomery, younger than the king, fits the young lion description. Although the tournament might not strictly qualify as a field of war, it occurred on the Champ de Mars in Paris, meaning field of wars, directly referencing the location. Most importantly, the queen believed that Nostradamus had foreseen her husband's fate more accurately than any of the 30,000 astrologers in Paris, making him her favorite. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.